It's a regular Tuesday morning when Lena Scott's world shatters. The sun is already high in the sky, casting a soft golden glow over her small apartment in the heart of Chicago. She's sipping her coffee, scrolling through emails, trying to squeeze in a few moments of peace before the chaos of her day begins. Her phone rings. The caller ID says First National Bank. Her stomach churns. It's a call she's not expecting. They've never called her before. Hello. Lena answers, trying to sound calm despite the unease crawling up her spine. Good morning, Miss Scott. This is James Anderson from First National Bank. I'm calling in regards to the mortgage loan on your property. Lena's heart skips a beat. Mortgage? Property? She doesn't own property. She lives in a modest one-bedroom apartment she barely scrapes by to afford. Her parents own the house back in their small suburban neighborhood. She hasn't been involved in any real estate transactions. What is this about? I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person, Lena says, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't have a mortgage. James clears his throat, his voice firm but not unkind. Miss Scott, we have a record here of a $500,000 mortgage that was taken out in your name. There are some overdue payments that need to be addressed. I'm just reaching out to remind you before it becomes a bigger issue. Lena's head spins. This can't be happening. A $500,000 mortgage? In her name? Without her knowledge? Her hands start to tremble, and she can feel her breath catching in her throat. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammers. I didn't sign any mortgage. I didn't apply for any loan. There's a long pause on the other end of the line before James speaks again. I understand this must be confusing. I can send you the documentation right away, but you may want to speak with your family members. The loan was processed and approved with your signature. Lena's world tilts. Her signature. Her mind races. Her parents. Could they have? No. There's no way they'd do this to her. They would never, right? Can you send me the details? She finally manages to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Absolutely, Miss Scott. I'll email you the documents now. Please review them as soon as possible. We'll be expecting payment or an explanation soon. Lena hangs up the phone, staring at the screen in disbelief. The quiet buzz of the city outside her window fades away. All she can hear now is the pounding of her own heartbeat. She's been a good daughter. She's worked hard, juggled 2 jobs to make ends meet, always been there when her parents needed her. They've had their struggles, financial troubles, medical bills piling up, her mom's chronic health issues, but she never imagined they would drag her into something like this. How could they do this? How could they betray her so completely? Her hands are shaking as she opens her email inbox. The message from First National Bank is already there, with the subject line, Mortgage Loan Approval Documents. She opens it, and her blood runs cold as she scrolls through the attachments. The first document is a loan application in her name. The second shows a signed mortgage agreement, a figure of $500,000 written clearly in bold, and her supposed signature at the bottom. Her signature. But it's not her handwriting. Lena leans back in her chair, feeling as though the room is closing in on her. How could this happen? How could her own family put her in a situation like this? There's no way she could have agreed to this, and yet here she is, trapped in something she had no part in creating. She picks up the phone again, her hands cold and clammy. Her first instinct is to call her mom, but a strange feeling holds her back. The image of her mother, always so loving, always so supportive, begins to flicker in her mind. But what if? Lena swipes her phone screen and dials her mother's number. It rings twice before she hears the familiar voice on the other end. Lena? Sweetheart, how are you? Is everything okay? Her voice cracks, and for a moment, she can't speak. She feels like a child again, caught in the middle of something beyond her control. Mom, I need to ask you something, Lena says, her voice trembling. There's a mortgage, a $500,000 mortgage, and it's in my name. There's a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Lena, honey, You signed my name, Lena interrupts, her voice rising. You took out a loan, a huge loan, in my name. Without telling me. Without asking me. What the hell, Mom? Her mother is silent for a long time. Lena can hear her breathing, slow and steady, but she says nothing. Mom? Lena presses. Why would you do this? Her mother finally speaks, her voice low and filled with a kind of sorrow. Lena, I didn't want you to find out this way. I didn't want to burden you. We were desperate, sweetheart. Your father, his health is getting worse, and the bills have been piling up. We didn't know what else to do. Lena feels the anger boiling up in her chest. Desperate? Desperate wasn't the word for this. Desperate didn't mean taking someone's life away without their consent. Desperate didn't mean betraying your own child. How could you think this was okay? Lena chokes out, her voice shaking with emotion. How could you think that this was something I would ever agree to? Her mother sighs, and Lena can hear the guilt in her voice. I'm sorry, Lena. I never wanted to put you in this position. I thought we could handle it. But it's all falling apart. We didn't know what else to do. Lena's heart aches. She wants to believe her mother. She wants to understand. But in this moment, she can't shake the feeling that something deeper is at play. Her family had crossed a line, and now she had no choice but to deal with the consequences. I need some time to think, Lena says, her voice hardening. I'll call you later. She hangs up the phone, her hands still trembling, her mind racing. This was not just a loan. This was a betrayal. Lena knew that the road ahead was going to be long, and she had no idea how she would navigate the mess that her family had created for her. But one thing was certain, she was going to get to the bottom of this. And if she had to destroy everything to rebuild herself, she would. She just didn't know yet how far she was willing to go. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Lena spent the next few days in a daze. The sun rose and set, but it felt as though she was floating through her life, disconnected, numb. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of that mortgage document, the $500,000 loan in her name, flashed in her mind. And every time she thought about it, the same question gnawed at her. Why? Why her? Why hadn't her family told her? Why hadn't they trusted her enough to be honest? Lena had always been the responsible one in the family. From the time she was young, she had taken on the role of the protector. Her father, once a hard-working mechanic, had fallen ill a few years ago with a chronic condition that left him weak and unable to hold down a steady job. Her mother, though loving, had never been particularly strong when it came to financial matters. And Lena? Well, she had always been the reliable one. She was the one who managed the bills, the one who made sure the house was in order, the one who made sacrifices. But this? This was something else entirely. She stared at her phone, the screen flickering with the name of her mother, Helen Scott. The call had been left unanswered when Lena finally hung up on her mom, but part of her felt guilty for doing it. Part of her still wanted to believe her mother had been acting out of desperation, out of love, even if it was twisted. But that didn't explain the lies, the hidden signatures, the sheer audacity of it all. She shook her head, putting the phone down. The silence of her apartment was deafening, and the weight of everything hanging over her felt suffocating. Lena's thoughts drifted back to her childhood, to simpler times when her family had seemed like the safest place in the world. She remembered the smell of her mom's cooking, the sound of her dad's laughter echoing through their small home in the suburbs. They had their struggles, sure, but they were a family. They had always been there for each other. Or at least, that's what she thought. She remembered being a little girl and how she had always wanted to be close to her mom. Helen had been her rock, even when things weren't going well. Lena and her younger brother, Jason, would sit at the kitchen table, watching their mom prepare dinner after a long day of work. Helen always had a way of making the hardest days seem a little brighter, even if it was just for a few moments. But then, everything changed. When Lena turned 16, her father's illness took a turn for the worse. The man who had once been strong and proud, who had worked tirelessly to support his family, became a shadow of himself. The treatments, the medications, the doctor visits, they drained the family's savings, and eventually, Lena took up a job at the local diner just to help with the bills. Her mother, Helen, was always so stressed, always trying to hold everything together. But Lena knew the truth. She could see the cracks forming, the tension, the frustration, the desperation in her mother's eyes. And then came the day when her mom sat her down and asked her to take out a credit card in her name to help pay for her father's treatment. "Lena, you're the only one we can count on," Helen had said, her voice thick with emotion. "We've tried everything, but the bills keep piling up. We need your help." Lena had agreed, because what else could she do? She couldn't turn her back on them. Not after everything her family had done for her. She could handle it, right? She could fix it. She was strong enough. But now this. A $500,000 mortgage. In her name. This was not what she signed up for. Lena's younger brother, Jason, had always been the free spirit of the family. He dropped out of high school to pursue music and spent most of his time drifting from one gig to another, living a life that seemed carefree but ultimately unproductive. Lena loved him, but she couldn't help feeling a twinge of resentment whenever he called asking for money or for help with one of his many failed ventures. Jason had always been the one who got the benefit of the doubt. While Lena was working 2 jobs and doing everything she could to keep the family afloat, Jason was always figuring it out. He was the dreamer, the artist, the one who was going to make it big. She never doubted his talent, but she knew he didn't understand the weight of the responsibilities Lena was carrying. He didn't see the sacrifices, the long hours, the sleepless nights. And now? Now, Lena was left to pick up the pieces of a mess that wasn't even hers to begin with. She couldn't stop thinking about Jason and what part he might have played in all of this. Was he involved? Did he know about the mortgage? Did he even care? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that there were so many unanswered questions. She couldn't trust anyone in her family anymore, not when they had done something like this. Lena knew she had to confront them. She couldn't let this go. Not when her entire future was at stake. She had spent her whole life doing the right thing, keeping her head down, playing by the rules. But now she was being dragged into a nightmare, and she wasn't going to take the fall for their mistakes. That evening, Lena sat in front of her laptop, staring at the email from First National Bank. The loan documents were still open on her screen, taunting her with their cold, bureaucratic indifference. She had already contacted a lawyer, someone she knew from a past case at work, who had promised to help her navigate this mess. But that was just the first step. She needed more information, and she needed to get to the bottom of this before it ruined everything she had worked for. She took a deep breath and hit reply on the email. "Dear Mr. Anderson, I need to discuss the mortgage loan in my name. I believe this is a mistake, and I would like to schedule a meeting to go over the details of the loan. Please let me know the best time for us to meet in person. Thank you, Lena Scott." Lena hit send and sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had just opened a door that she wasn't sure she could close. But there was no turning back now. The next move was up to her. Lena's stomach churned with a mixture of dread and anger as she stared at the blinking cursor on her screen. The email to First National Bank had been sent, and now she was just waiting for a response. She couldn't focus on anything else. The weight of the $500,000 mortgage, signed with a fraudulent version of her name, pressed down on her chest like a 1,000-pound stone. How could they have done this? How could her family, the people who were supposed to love and protect her, betray her in the most devastating way possible? She glanced at the clock on her wall. It was already 9:30 p.m. She had been sitting in the same spot for hours, mentally preparing herself for what would come next. The lawyer she contacted earlier was set to meet with her tomorrow, but she knew the real battle was going to be with her family. No lawyer, no bank, could fix the emotional mess she was about to dive into. She had to face them. She had to confront her mother, her father, and Jason, and demand answers. The phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be the bank? Hello, Lena? It was her mother's voice, shaky and soft. Mom, Lena's voice faltered before she steadied it. We need to talk. I know, sweetheart. I wanted to call before you heard from the bank. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to drag you into this, but we didn't know what else to do. Helen's voice cracked, a mixture of guilt and fear in every word. Lena squeezed her eyes shut. She was trying to stay composed, but it was harder than she thought. What exactly happened, Mom? Why would you do this? Why would you take out a loan in my name without telling me? Helen let out a long, weary sigh. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Lena. We never meant to hurt you. Your father's health, it's been getting worse, and the insurance doesn't cover everything. We've been trying to make ends meet, but nothing was working. We couldn't get a loan in our names, so we thought if we used yours. Used mine? Lena cut her off, her voice sharp. Do you understand what you've done? Do you know what this means for me? You've ruined everything. I didn't think her mother started, but Lena wasn't listening anymore. She couldn't breathe. Her mother's words were like shards of glass, cutting through her every word, every thought. Her head was spinning, the weight of it all crashing down on her. She had been the one to bear the brunt of her family's struggles her whole life, but this was a betrayal she couldn't wrap her head around. She couldn't forgive them for this. I have to go, Lena said, her voice hoarse. I'll deal with the bank tomorrow. But this? I need time to process, Mom. I can't do this right now. Lena, please. But Lena hung up before her mother could finish. The next morning, Lena found herself sitting across from a lawyer in a small, sterile office. The walls were painted a dull gray, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing quietly. She had never felt so small, so insignificant. The lawyer, a man named Mark Matthews, was nice enough, polite, professional, but the reality of what she was about to undertake still felt overwhelming. So Mark began, flipping through some documents on his desk. We've received the initial paperwork from First National Bank, and I've reviewed the mortgage agreement in detail. It's pretty clear that the signature on this loan is a forgery. Lena nodded, her heart racing. It doesn't look like my handwriting. I never signed anything. Mark paused, looking at her with a mix of sympathy and understanding. I'm afraid your family has put you in a very difficult position, Lena. You didn't sign this loan, but they may argue that you implicitly consented by allowing them to use your name for financial matters in the past. Lena clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. This is unbelievable. I've spent my entire life helping them, supporting them, and they repay me by ruining my future. Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. The first thing we need to do is disassociate you from this mortgage legally. We'll have to file a formal dispute with the bank and get their legal department to investigate how this loan was processed in your name. We may also need to consider pressing charges for identity theft, depending on what comes to light. Lena nodded, though the weight of it all felt heavier than ever. She felt like she was sinking, like the ground beneath her was slowly being pulled away. How had it all gone so wrong? Okay, she said, trying to hold it together. What do we do first? Mark smiled reassuringly. First, we'll file a fraud claim with the bank and make sure they freeze any further transactions on the mortgage. Then we'll begin preparing for a possible court case, should it come to that. But don't worry, I'll handle most of the heavy lifting. You just need to provide me with any evidence you have of the forgery. I already sent you everything I have, Lena said, taking a deep breath. But I need to know something, Mark. Is there any chance that I'll get out of this without ruining my life? Mark hesitated for a moment, then gave her a frank look. It's going to be a long road, Lena. But there is a chance. We'll need to build a strong case, and the more evidence we have, the better. But don't lose hope just yet. This is a fight, but it's not over. Lena's chest tightened as she stood up to leave the office. She had never been one to back down from a fight, but this was different. Her family was at the center of it all, and no matter how much she wanted to walk away, she knew that wouldn't solve anything. She had to face them. She had to confront the people who had once been the center of her world. Her phone buzzed again as she was walking out of the building, and she saw that it was Jason's number. She almost ignored it. But then, something inside her stirred, a mixture of dread and curiosity. What now, Jason? Lena stood on the bustling sidewalk, her phone still buzzing in her hand. The day had turned cold and gray, a perfect reflection of her mood. The sharp autumn wind bit at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside her. She'd just left the lawyer's office, and even though she was starting to get the legal process in motion, it still felt like she was falling through an abyss. The number on her phone screen was familiar, Jason's. Her younger brother, Jason Scott. The one who had always been the wild card of the family. Lena had spent most of her life trying to protect him from himself, from his own choices, but she'd never once thought he would be capable of something like this. Should I answer? She wondered. But before she could make up her mind, the call went to voicemail. The message pinged. Hey, Lena, Jason's voice came through, sounding unusually hesitant. I know things are probably really crazy right now. I'm sorry about the whole mortgage thing. I didn't know what Mom and Dad were doing. Honestly, I didn't know they'd take it this far. I didn't want you to get hurt. If you can, just let me know you're okay. I'm here, okay? Lena stood still on the sidewalk, her heart racing in her chest. It was the first time in days that she felt anything close to an emotion other than anger and betrayal. Jason's voice had a vulnerability to it that she hadn't expected, but that didn't mean everything was forgiven. She had to see him. She had to confront him. With a deep breath, she swiped the screen of her phone and dialed his number. It rang twice before Jason picked up. Lena? His voice was quiet, cautious. You okay? She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. I'm fine, Jason. But I need to ask you something. You need to tell me everything you know about this mortgage. Now. Jason's response was slow, as if he were weighing every word. Lena, I swear to you, I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't know they'd do something like this. I never asked them to. I never even thought they would use your name. Lena felt a wave of frustration rise within her. She wasn't sure if she believed him. How could you not know, Jason? How could you not know that they were taking out a loan in my name? You live in that house. You see the financial chaos. How could you just stand by and not say anything? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. She could almost hear him thinking, struggling to find the right words. I didn't know how bad it was, Lena, he said finally. I swear to God, I didn't. Mom and Dad kept telling me everything would be fine. They told me it was temporary, that they just needed a little bit of extra help until Dad got better. I didn't think they'd go this far, and I didn't think you'd get dragged into it. Lena's jaw tightened. But you didn't stop it? You didn't say anything. I know, Jason admitted quietly. I should've. But you know how they are. You know how Mom can be when she's stressed. She makes decisions, and when she makes up her mind, that's it. I should have stepped in. I should have stopped them from going through with it. Lena could feel the weight of his words, but it didn't make the situation any easier. Her brother, who had always been the carefree dreamer, was now acknowledging his failure to act. But was that enough? The damage had been done. The $500,000 mortgage was now part of her life, and that wasn't something that could be easily undone. So what, Jason? You were just going to ignore it until I found out. Lena's voice was low, dangerously calm. No. I thought I could fix it, he said desperately. I thought I could convince them to tell you, but I didn't want to worry you. You were already stressed with work, and I didn't want to make it worse. Lena could hear the sincerity in his voice, but the pain was still there, lingering in her chest like a heavy stone. She had spent so many years protecting him, but now it felt like he was part of the problem, not the solution. You need to tell me the truth, Jason, Lena said, her voice firm. Did you have any part in this? Were you involved in taking out the loan? No, Lena. I swear, Jason answered quickly, his voice breaking a little. I wasn't involved. I didn't sign anything. I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't part of that decision. Lena closed her eyes, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Could she believe him? She wanted to, she really did. But how could she trust anyone in her family right now? I'm coming over, she said, her decision final. We need to talk. All of us. Lena's apartment was a small, modest space, but it was hers. It had always been her sanctuary from the chaos that was her family. Yet, even here, she couldn't escape it. She had tried to forget about them for a while, to focus on her work and the things she could control, but now it seemed like everything was spiraling out of control. Jason would be arriving soon, but Lena couldn't sit still. She paced in circles, her thoughts running wild. Her mind replayed the conversations she'd had with her mother and her brother. They all seemed so genuine, so remorseful, but that didn't change the fact that they had all kept her in the dark. They had knowingly pulled her into this mess without a second thought. And for what? To save themselves? Lena rubbed her temples. She knew she had to be strong, but part of her didn't know how much more she could take. How could she confront her parents? How could she sit across from them and act like they hadn't ruined her life? The sound of a knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She walked to the door, opening it to find Jason standing in the hallway. His eyes were tired, his usual carefree demeanor replaced with an uncharacteristic seriousness. He looked lost. And for the first time in a long time, Lena felt pity for him. Come in, she said, stepping aside to let him in. She didn't know if she was ready for this conversation, but it was happening. Whether she liked it or not. Jason stepped inside and sat down on the couch without a word. Lena took a deep breath before sitting down next to him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. We need to talk, she said. I need to know everything. Why this happened? Who knew what and when? Jason nodded slowly, looking at the floor. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, trying to figure out how to explain everything. I don't know everything, Lena, he began, his voice quiet. But I know this, Mom and Dad, they've been struggling for a long time. And when Dad's health got worse, it just seemed like they were losing hope. I think they saw the loan as their last shot. They didn't think it would get this far, but they didn't know how else to fix things. They thought they were protecting you, but they were too scared to tell you the truth. Lena clenched her fists, her jaw set in determination. But why me, Jason? Why did they think it was okay to put everything in my name? I don't know, Jason said softly, but whatever happens, I'm here. I want to fix this too. Lena could feel the tears threatening to spill, but she blinked them back. There was no time for tears. There was only time for action. She had a long way to go before she could trust anyone in her family again. But she couldn't back down now. The battle was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed felt like a blur of meetings, phone calls, and endless paperwork. Lena had never been so buried in legal jargon before, but the more she read, the clearer it became. This was going to be a long fight. Mark Matthews, her lawyer, had promised her that they'd get her out of this mortgage mess, but Lena knew deep down that this was more than just a financial issue. It was a matter of trust, of family, of betrayal. The weight of the situation sat heavily on her chest as she worked through the details of the case. Each email she sent to the bank, each form she signed, felt like one more small step toward reclaiming her life. But with every small victory came an overwhelming flood of questions. How had things gotten this bad? How had her parents, the people she'd trusted most in the world, made such a disastrous decision? The more she thought about it, the more it gnawed at her. And the more she looked at the files, the more she realized that this wasn't just an innocent mistake. There was something bigger at play here. It wasn't just her parents' desperation. It wasn't just their mounting debt. Lena began to see a pattern. A troubling pattern. Her phone rang just after dinner on the third night since she'd confronted Jason. It was a private number. Without thinking, she answered. "Hello." Lena, her mother's voice came through, thick with guilt. "I need to talk to you." Lena exhaled sharply, her anger flaring. She'd been bracing for this call ever since the confrontation with Jason. "What's left to say, Mom?" she asked, her voice barely contained. "What more do you want me to hear?" Helen's voice wavered. "Please, just listen to me. I need you to understand why we did what we did." Lena's heart thudded in her chest, but she stayed quiet. "You've always been so strong, Lena," her mother continued. "We never meant for you to carry this burden. You've done so much for us over the years, and we never wanted you to be involved in this. But when your father's health started failing, we were desperate. We thought we could fix everything, and I thought, if I could get this loan, we could keep things from falling apart." "You lied to me, Mom." Lena's voice cracked, the anger bubbling over. "You and Dad lied to me. And now you've put my future in jeopardy. You don't get to justify it by saying you were trying to protect me." "I'm sorry," Helen said quietly. "I know we hurt you, but Lena, we're scared. Your father's been in and out of the hospital, and the bills keep piling up. We thought we could handle it. We thought we could get back on our feet." Lena's hand tightened around the phone. "So, you used me. You used my name to do it. We didn't know how else to get the money we needed. The bank wouldn't approve us. Jason didn't have a credit history to do it, and you had a good job, a steady income. We thought we were doing the right thing." The silence between them hung like a dense fog. Lena's mind raced. She had always known that her family had their struggles, but this was far worse than anything she could have imagined. She took a deep breath. "How long have you known this was coming? How long were you planning on keeping it from me?" Helen's voice grew quieter. "We never planned on telling you, Lena. We didn't want to burden you. We didn't want to ruin everything for you. But when we saw how the mortgage was handled, I should have told you sooner. I should have." Lena could feel the tears rising, but she swallowed them down. She needed to stay strong, for herself if not for anyone else. "Do you understand the magnitude of this?" she asked. "Do you know what's at stake? This isn't just about money anymore. You've taken my future and tied it to something that wasn't mine to begin with." "I know," Helen whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Lena. Please forgive me." Lena could feel the strain in her chest, the weight of everything she had just learned. She could hear the regret in her mother's voice, but she couldn't allow herself to forgive her just yet. Not when everything felt so broken, so violated. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom," she said, her voice raw. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." With that, she ended the call. Her hand trembled as she hung up. Her heart ached as if it had been torn apart, piece by piece. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal strategies and difficult conversations. Lena knew that if she wanted to truly sever the tie between her and the mortgage, she had to act fast. Mark Matthews was doing everything in his power to build a case, but Lena was starting to wonder if there was anyone who could fix this. Her family had made decisions for her without consulting her, and now she was the one left cleaning up the mess. And as if things weren't complicated enough, Jason came knocking at her door again. Lena opened it reluctantly. Jason's eyes were red, like he hadn't been sleeping, and his shoulders were hunched, like he was carrying an invisible weight. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I need to talk to you, Lena," Jason said softly, almost pleading. "I know I screwed up. I know I should have said something sooner, but please, let me make it right." Lena stared at him for a long moment. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but she wasn't sure it was enough anymore. She had spent years protecting him, making excuses for his mistakes, but this was different. "I don't know if you can fix this, Jason," she said quietly. "I don't even know if I want you to." Jason's face fell, and Lena could see the hurt in his expression. He had always been her little brother, the one she tried to protect from making bad choices. But this was beyond that. This wasn't about looking out for him anymore. This was about her. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Lena," Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just need you to know I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to stop it." Lena's heart twisted, but she wasn't sure how much more she could take. She turned away, walking towards the window. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her back, but she couldn't look him in the eye. "I need space, Jason," she said, her voice firm. "I need to figure this out on my own. I need to get out of this nightmare. I can't keep thinking about everyone right now. I need to focus on what's going to keep me from losing everything." Jason didn't say anything else. He turned and left, the sound of the door clicking shut behind him echoing in Lena's mind. She stood there for a long time, staring out the window, lost in thought. The battle was far from over, and she was beginning to wonder if anyone was going to make it out unscathed. Lena didn't know how much more of the pressure she could take. It had been a week since Jason had left her apartment, and still, the weight of everything hung over her like a thick, unrelenting fog. The confrontation with her mother had cracked something deep inside her, a fracture in the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her family. And now, as she sat in her office staring at the pile of legal papers in front of her, she realized that the truth wasn't just painful, it was suffocating. Mark Matthews, her lawyer, had been working tirelessly to get her out of the mortgage mess, but every step forward felt like one step back. The bank wasn't cooperating, and Lena was quickly running out of options. The longer the mortgage stayed in her name, the worse it would get. The interest rates were climbing, the debt was growing, and every day she spent fighting her parents' decisions felt like a day she couldn't get back. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Mark. "We need to talk. Urgent." Lena's heart sank. She'd been waiting for this call, the one that would tell her they'd made progress, that there was a way out. But somehow, she knew this wasn't going to be good news. She dialed his number immediately, her fingers trembling. "Lena," Mark answered on the first ring, his voice tense. "We've hit a snag." She braced herself. "What's happened?" "It's worse than we thought," he said, sounding more frustrated than usual. "I've been digging through the paperwork, and I've discovered something that complicates things even further. It's not just the mortgage in your name. There's also a second lien, a second loan they took out behind your back. The paperwork was filed through a company that specializes in high-risk lending. Your parents didn't just take out a mortgage, they've effectively put you up as collateral on 2 separate loans." Lena's stomach twisted into a knot. She felt lightheaded, her mind racing to process what Mark was saying. 2 loans? "How long have they been hiding this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but the second loan was taken out around the same time as the mortgage. The terms are incredibly risky, and the interest rates are astronomical. If your parents don't make the payments, the bank can go after your property, your assets, and even your future earnings." Lena leaned back in her chair, the room spinning around her. She felt a wave of nausea crash over her. The situation was far worse than she had imagined. How could they do this? "Why didn't they tell me?" Lena asked, more to herself than to Mark. The anger she had been holding back for days started to surge. "They didn't just betray my trust. They put my entire future at risk." "I know, Lena. I'm so sorry. We're going to do everything we can to resolve this, but it's going to take time. And we may need to go public with this to force the bank's hand. I'll need you to be prepared for that. It's not going to be easy, but I don't see another option." Lena's mind raced. Her first instinct was to call her parents, to demand answers, to confront them about this latest betrayal. But the idea of hearing their excuses again, hearing how they didn't mean to hurt her, was unbearable. She couldn't even begin to process the magnitude of what they had done. "I'll be in touch soon," Mark said, breaking through her thoughts. "I'll keep you updated as we move forward. But Lena, please, this is serious. You need to prepare for the worst." The line went dead, and Lena sat there in stunned silence, unable to move, her hand still gripping the phone. The next morning, she found herself pacing the apartment again, the weight of the situation settling deeper into her bones. The thought of going to her parents' house, confronting them about the second loan, made her stomach turn. But she knew she couldn't let it go. Not now. Not after everything they had done. Lena dressed quickly, pulling on a jacket over her simple, professional outfit. She had an appointment with Mark in 2 hours, but she couldn't wait any longer. She had to talk to her parents, had to demand the truth from them before the legal process tore everything apart. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from Jason. "Lena, I know you're probably pissed, but I need to talk to you. I'm serious. Please just hear me out." She felt a sharp pang of irritation as she read the message. She had told him time and time again that she couldn't deal with him right now. But despite her frustration, part of her still cared about him. Jason was still her little brother, no matter how badly he had messed up. Lena stared at the screen for a moment before typing a quick reply. "I'll be at Mom and Dad's in an hour. I'll talk to you then." She didn't have time for another drawn-out conversation with Jason. This was bigger than him now. It was bigger than any of them. When Lena arrived at her parents' house, the familiar sight of their old brick home hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't been here in months. Her parents had always been the type to make everything look perfect on the outside, but she knew better than anyone that appearances were just a facade. Beneath the surface, things were always chaotic. She rang the doorbell, her fingers still shaking from the conversation with Mark. A few seconds later, the door swung open, revealing her mother. Helen's face lit up with surprise, but there was no warmth in her smile. "Lena," she said softly, stepping back to let her in. "I wasn't expecting you today." Lena didn't bother with pleasantries. "We need to talk, Mom. About everything." Helen's face faltered, but she nodded and led Lena into the living room, where her father sat in his usual spot on the couch, a thick blanket draped over his legs. He looked frail, older than Lena remembered, and his eyes were clouded with confusion. "Lena, sweetheart," he mumbled, his voice weak. "I'm glad you're here." Lena forced a smile, but her heart wasn't in it. "We need to talk about the mortgage," she said bluntly. "And the second loan." Helen's face went pale. Her father's brow furrowed, but he didn't say anything. "You took out a second loan in my name," Lena continued, her voice rising with anger. "You didn't just take out a mortgage behind my back. You put me at risk for a second loan, one with outrageous terms. How could you do this to me, to our family?" Helen's hands trembled as she sat down beside her husband, her voice breaking. "Lena, I didn't know what else to do. Your father's illness, the bills, the pressure, it was too much. We didn't want to drag you into this. We thought we could fix it ourselves." "By ruining my life?" Lena shot back. "You thought you could fix it by tying me to your debts? Without asking me? Without even telling me?" Her father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Lena, I didn't want this. Your mother, she pushed me to do it. I couldn't see a way out. We thought we could turn it around. I'm sorry." Lena stood frozen, the anger and betrayal threatening to consume her. "You don't get to say you're sorry, Dad. You don't get to apologize for ruining everything. You should have told me the truth. You should have trusted me enough to ask me." There was a long silence in the room, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. "Lena, I'm sorry," Helen whispered again, tears welling in her eyes. But Lena was beyond the point of listening to apologies. "I'm done," she said firmly. "You can't fix this. You've broken too much, and now I have to fix it. But don't expect me to forgive you for this. Not now, not ever." And with that, Lena turned and walked out the door, leaving her parents standing in the house that no longer felt like home. Lena's world had been crumbling for weeks now. The truth was that it had been crumbling for years. She just hadn't seen it clearly until the last few days. Her family, the ones she had trusted, the ones she thought she understood, had shattered her perception of what love, loyalty, and trust really meant. The confrontation with her parents had been a blow, but it was also a wake-up call. She wasn't just dealing with financial ruin. She was fighting a battle for her own identity, for her sense of self-worth, and for her future. They had used her. Yes, that was undeniable, but the truth was, they hadn't just used her name. They had taken something much more valuable from her security. And that, Lena knew, was something she would never get back so easily. But even as she sat there in her apartment, staring blankly at the paperwork in front of her, she realized that she could either sit there and wallow in self-pity or stand up and fight back. The next morning, Mark's call came earlier than usual. She hadn't slept much. The images of her parents, their faces filled with regret, were still fresh in her mind. She hadn't heard from Jason since the last message he'd sent, and while part of her wanted to ignore it, she knew she couldn't afford to. The longer she waited, the more control they had over her. "Lena," Mark's voice crackled through the phone. "I've got an update, but it's not good news." Lena sat up straighter, her fingers already tapping the table in anticipation. "What is it? What's the next move?" "We've got the second loan on the record, but here's the kicker. Your parents took out a third line of credit using your name as well, without even informing the bank that you were unaware. And they didn't just do it through a traditional lender. They used a high-interest, subprime loan company." Lena could feel her throat tighten. "They did what?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "They leveraged your credit score to take out a third loan for even more money. The interest rates are borderline illegal. And now, the bank's trying to squeeze everything they can from your assets to cover it all." Lena felt the cold grip of panic spreading through her. She had been so focused on the mortgage and the second loan, but this was the worst of it. "Mark, what the hell am I supposed to do?" she demanded, feeling a rush of frustration and helplessness. "I'm filing motions to get the loans restructured and to prove that you didn't knowingly sign or agree to any of this, but the bank is going to fight us. They've already got your name on paper for all of this." Lena slammed her fist on the table. "How much longer will this take?" "It depends," he said. "But it could be months, if not longer." "Lena, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It's going to be a long, ugly battle. We're going to have to make the bank prove that they knew you didn't sign on the dotted line willingly." "I'm not going to wait that long," Lena said, her voice hard. "I've already lost too much. I need to take control of this now. I can't just let them drag me through the mud." Mark hesitated. "There's something you could do. You might be able to pressure them into making a move faster, but it's risky. You'd have to go public with the entire situation. If we went to the media, it could force their hand." The weight of the decision settled heavily on Lena's chest. She had always avoided drama, avoided making things worse, but now she felt like she had nothing left to lose. "I'll think about it," she said, hanging up the phone and running her hands through her hair in frustration. She stood up, pacing the length of her apartment. The more she thought about it, the more the idea made sense. Going public with the details of her family's financial lies could bring pressure from the bank, but it could also make her a target. Lena didn't care about the backlash. She cared about ending this nightmare. Later that evening, Lena sat at her computer, scrolling through pages of legal advice, financial blogs, and horror stories of people who had been through similar situations. She had to learn quickly if she was going to take control of her life again. She needed to understand the laws, the loopholes, and most importantly, how to leverage the situation in her favor. Her mind raced. The loans, her family's deception, the betrayal, it all felt like it was crushing her from every angle. But as she read through one particularly scathing review of the predatory lenders that her parents had used, a thought flickered in her mind. What if I could expose them? She quickly jotted down some notes, her fingers flying over the keys. She could make the bank look bad, but it would take more than just a few social media posts. She'd need more than that. She needed proof. That's when the idea struck her. She had to go after the lenders directly. They had to be the ones to feel the heat first. After all, they were the ones who had allowed her parents to rack up the debt in her name. The next morning, she woke up early, ready to take action. She had called a few financial consultants who could advise her on how to go about exposing the predatory practices of these lenders, but she also needed to make sure that whatever she did next wouldn't put her in an even worse situation. As the sun filtered through the blinds, she felt an odd sense of clarity. She might not be able to fix the damage her family had done right away, but she could turn the tables. She had a voice, a story, and the will to see this through to the end. No more waiting for someone to come to her rescue. She would take back control. Lena spent the next several hours on the phone with various professionals, financial experts, investigative journalists, and even former clients who had suffered at the hands of the same lending company. By the end of the day, she had secured meetings with a few potential partners who could help her bring the truth to light. Just as she was finishing up the last call, Jason texted her again. "Lena, please. I'm sorry for everything. I've been trying to figure out how I can help. Can we meet up tomorrow?" Lena stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The last thing she wanted to do was meet with him again. But she had a choice to make. She could keep pushing him away, or she could give him one last chance to prove that he wasn't just another person trying to use her. She took a deep breath and typed back. "Fine. Tomorrow noon. We need to talk about everything." The following day, Lena met Jason at a small cafe in the downtown area. It wasn't the first time they had sat across from each other, but today felt different. She had spent the last few weeks carrying a weight she hadn't asked for. She wasn't sure she could trust him anymore, but she was willing to listen, at least, for now. Jason was already there when she arrived. He stood up as soon as she walked in, and for a moment, she could see the old Jason, the one who used to make her laugh, the one she used to protect. "Lena," he said softly, "I've screwed up. And I know saying I'm sorry doesn't make up for what happened. But I want to help. I don't want you to carry this burden alone. You've been doing all this by yourself, and I know it's been eating at you." Lena sat down across from him, her eyes never leaving his face. "Why now, Jason? Why didn't you step up earlier? Why did it take all of this for you to come forward?" Jason's eyes were sincere, but there was a hint of shame in them. "I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to admit how badly I messed up. I thought you'd figure it out on your own, but I was wrong. I'm sorry, Lena." For a moment, Lena said nothing. She had heard this apology before, and while part of her still wanted to believe him, another part of her knew that his words wouldn't erase the damage. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Jason," she finally said, her voice strained. "But I'll give you one last chance. I'm going to take this to the media. I'm going after the lenders. And I need your help to do it." Jason's eyes widened. "Wait, you're going public with this?" Lena nodded. "Yes, it's the only way I'll get out of this. I need to expose what they did." Jason looked uncertain, but after a long moment, he nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever I can." Lena had always been the quiet one. The one who observed, who held her tongue when things got tough, who avoided conflict whenever possible. But now, as the weight of her family's lies pressed down on her, she realized that staying silent was no longer an option. The time for quiet endurance had passed. It was time to speak up, to demand answers, and to expose the truth. The decision to go public was one she had wrestled with for days. Lena had always preferred to handle her problems privately, but this was different. Her entire future was on the line, and she wasn't going to let her family's mess destroy everything she had worked for. If going public was the only way to force the banks, the lenders, and her family to face the consequences, then that's what she was going to do. She had already called a few investigative journalists she knew from her years working in PR. People who weren't afraid to dig into the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. And with their help, she had lined up interviews, a press release, and a detailed exposé of her family's financial nightmare. Her parents, the bank, the lenders, they would all be exposed. No stone would be left unturned. But as the days wore on, Lena began to wonder if she was prepared for the fallout. Exposing her family's dirty secrets would certainly bring the attention she was seeking, but it would also bring shame. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, the tears, the regret. Was it worth it? Could she ever look them in the eye again? Then, Jason came through with his promise to help. While Lena had initially been skeptical about his sincerity, it became clear he was determined to make things right. He helped her organize the documents, reached out to the media contacts he knew, and even offered to appear alongside her in the interviews. But despite the extra support, Lena still felt like she was on the edge of a precipice. It was hard to shake the feeling that once she stepped off, there would be no turning back. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about her very sense of who she was and what her family had become. The night before the press release was set to go live, Lena stood on her apartment balcony, staring out at the city below. The bright lights of downtown seemed so distant, like another world entirely. She was about to expose everything. The truth about her family, the financial lies, the betrayal. There would be no more hiding, no more pretending everything was okay. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was a message from Mark. "Lena, I just got word from the bank. They're already scrambling to suppress the information. Be ready for a fight. You're about to make a lot of powerful people angry." Lena stared at the text, her stomach twisting in knots. The fight was coming, and she was about to be at the center of it. "I'm ready. Let's do this." She typed back, feeling a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. There was no going back now. The next morning, as Lena stood in front of the camera for her first live interview, the weight of her decision settled over her once again. Her palms were sweaty, her heart was racing, but she forced herself to steady her breath. This was it. She was taking control of her life. The host of the news segment, a sharp, experienced journalist named Carla Briggs, greeted her with a warm smile that barely masked the skepticism in her eyes. It was clear that Carla had heard rumors about Lena's story, but she hadn't yet seen the proof. "Lena, thank you for joining us today," Carla began, her voice smooth and professional. "This is a very personal story, and one that has garnered a lot of attention. Can you tell us how you found yourself in this situation?" Lena took a deep breath and began. "I found myself in this situation because my parents made decisions for me that I didn't know about, decisions that have put my future, my financial security, in jeopardy. They took out a mortgage and 2 separate loans in my name without my consent, using my credit to secure millions in debt. They didn't ask me. They didn't even tell me. I was completely in the dark." The camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the raw emotion in Lena's face. She wasn't just telling a story, she was revealing a betrayal. And every word she spoke felt like a weight being lifted from her shoulders. "I didn't find out until it was too late," she continued. "By the time I learned about the loans, I was already responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. My name was on every document, my credit was ruined, and there was nothing I could do to stop it." Carla nodded sympathetically. "And you've been in this battle with the banks ever since?" Lena nodded. "I've been fighting every day to clear my name, to protect my future. But the banks haven't been cooperative. They've ignored my pleas, and even worse, they've tried to cover up the mess my parents created. The truth is that I'm not just fighting for my financial future, I'm fighting for my dignity, my trust in the people I thought I could rely on. As Lena spoke, her heart raced with a mixture of nerves and adrenaline. It felt surreal to be telling her story like this. She had always kept her personal life behind closed doors. But now, as she looked at the camera, she realized that telling her story was the only way to reclaim her power. The interview aired later that afternoon, and by evening, it had gone viral. Messages of support flooded in from every direction: friends, strangers, even people who had been through similar struggles. The media outlets picked up the story, and soon, Lena's name was all over the news. The bank, the lenders, her parents. Everyone was being forced to answer for their actions. But as much as the media attention brought relief, it also brought pressure. The bank's lawyers were already circling, preparing to fight her every step of the way. And Lena knew that this was just the beginning. She had become a target, and her family's dirty secrets were now out in the open. Still, Lena couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. This was her life, her future, and no one else had the right to dictate it. That night, as Lena lay in bed, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Jason. "I saw the interview. I'm proud of you, Lena. We're in this together." Lena stared at the screen, a part of her unsure how to feel. Jason had been a part of this chaos, but now he was offering her his support. She could feel the weight of her decision settle in, the uncertainty of what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had done the right thing. She put the phone down and closed her eyes, allowing herself a few moments of peace before the storm hit. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day full of challenges, sure, but a day where she was no longer hiding. Tomorrow, she would fight for her future. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, media appearances, and legal documents. Lena barely had time to process the enormity of what she had done. The story of her family's betrayal had gone viral, but with the exposure came consequences. The bank, the lenders, her parents, they were all scrambling to protect themselves, and Lena knew the hardest part was still ahead. The media attention was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it was giving her a platform to tell her side of the story, to expose the corruption and negligence that had led to her financial ruin. On the other hand, it made her a target. She was getting death threats, calls from reporters asking invasive questions, and even hate mail from people who blamed her for her family's mess. But Lena had expected this. She'd known that once she went public, there would be no turning back. And yet, the weight of it all still hung heavy on her chest. She had made the right choice to speak out, but the world she had known was no longer the same. She was no longer just Lena, the quiet girl who stayed out of trouble. Now she was a symbol of everything that was wrong with the banking system, with the way families were broken by greed. The following week, Lena had a meeting with Mark and his team. The law firm had been doing everything they could to keep the pressure on the bank, but it was becoming clear that this would be a long, ugly fight. The bank wasn't about to admit they had made mistakes, and the lenders had a lot of money to protect. "It's going to be a war, Lena," Mark said, his face grim. "We're up against powerful people. The bank has lawyers who have worked for decades to bury cases like this. But you've got one thing they don't have." "What's that?" Lena asked, her voice flat. "Public support. The media has been relentless. The public is on your side, and that's something they can't ignore." Lena leaned back in her chair, considering his words. It was true. She had become a symbol of the corruption that ran deep in the financial industry. But the reality was that the banks and lenders didn't care about public opinion. They cared about their bottom line, and they would do anything to protect it. "We need to keep the pressure on," Mark continued. "We've filed motions to invalidate the loans, and we've got a solid case on paper. But this won't be quick. We need to keep the media coverage up, get people talking about the fraud your parents committed, and make the bank feel like the walls are closing in." Lena nodded. She had no illusions about how difficult this would be. She had to fight not only for her financial future, but for the truth to come out no matter how ugly it was. That night, Lena was alone in her apartment, scrolling through her social media feeds. The messages of support continued to pour in, but so did the backlash. There were comments calling her a gold digger or a liar. Some people even questioned if she had fabricated the entire situation for attention. It was hard to ignore the hurtful words, but Lena forced herself not to dwell on them. She had been through enough. She didn't need to justify herself to anyone. What mattered now was finishing what she'd started. Then, her phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "Lena, I've been thinking about everything. I want to help. I know things have been messy between us, but I can't sit by and do nothing." She stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Jason had been a major part of the mess, and part of her wanted to cut him out entirely. But the truth was, she needed him. Whether she liked it or not, Jason had connections that could help her win this battle. She replied quickly, "We need to talk. Meet me tomorrow." The following day, Lena met Jason at a small cafe on the edge of town. He was already there when she arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked different somehow. There was no smugness in his posture, no sense of superiority. Instead, he looked like a man who had seen the weight of his actions and had finally come to terms with the fact that things couldn't go back to the way they were. "Lena," Jason said as she sat down, "I know I messed up. I didn't think this would spiral out of control like it has. But I'm here now, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it right." Lena studied him carefully. There was a sincerity in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen before. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was regret, but whatever it was, she could see that he was trying to make amends. "I'm listening," she said. "I've got contacts in the media. I can help you push the story further, get it in front of the right people. But I also know that we need more than just media attention to win this. We need leverage. We need something the banks can't ignore," Jason said, his voice low and serious. Lena's heart raced. "What are you suggesting?" "I can help you get the proof we need. If you want to bring down the bank, we need to expose their dirty dealings. The lenders, they have a lot to hide. I know people who can get us that information." Lena leaned forward, her mind racing. She had already exposed her family's financial fraud, but this was different. Going after the banks directly would be dangerous. It could get messy, more than it already had. But if Jason was telling the truth, this could be the key to everything. "Are you sure you can get the evidence?" Lena asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling inside her. Jason nodded. "I have people on the inside. They've been feeding me information for months. I know where the skeletons are buried. All we need to do is dig." Lena sat back, her thoughts spinning. She had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. If this was her chance to expose the entire corrupt system, she couldn't pass it up. But was she ready for the consequences? Was she prepared to risk everything to take down the people who had destroyed her life? There was no turning back. She had already made the decision to fight, and now she was about to take the next step. "Do it," Lena said. "Get me the proof. Let's end this." The day of reckoning had arrived. Lena had done everything she could to prepare for what was about to unfold, but deep down, she knew that this battle was far from over. The fight to clear her name, to bring justice for her stolen future, and to expose the truth about her family was entering its final, dangerous phase. But for the first time in months, Lena felt a calm determination settling over her. She had been pushed to the brink, but now she was taking control. Jason had delivered on his promise. He had gathered the damning evidence, documents, audio recordings, internal communications. Proof of the corruption within the bank, the fraud that had plagued her family, and the underhanded tactics the lenders had employed to keep her trapped in debt. Now, all she had to do was unleash it. The plan was simple: take the evidence to the press, make the public aware of what had happened, and put pressure on the authorities to investigate. But as Lena prepared for her final press conference, a nagging voice in the back of her mind warned her that this wasn't going to be easy. The people she was up against were powerful, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. Lena stood in front of the camera, the weight of the evidence in her hand. Her face was a mask of calm determination, but inside, her heart was pounding. This was it, the final moment. She had made the decision to expose everything, and now the world was about to find out. The room was filled with reporters, photographers, and the sharp hum of cameras and microphones. The air was thick with anticipation. Lena knew that every word she spoke today would be scrutinized, analyzed, and dissected. There was no room for mistakes. Lena, thank you for joining us today. Carla Briggs, the journalist who had been covering her story since the beginning, greeted her. We know this has been an incredibly difficult journey for you, but today, you've brought evidence that will change everything. What do you want the public to know? Lena took a deep breath, her hands gripping the papers in front of her. I want the world to know the truth, she said, her voice strong and steady. For months, I've been fighting a battle that I didn't ask for, a battle my family forced me into. The bank, the lenders, and my own parents took advantage of me, using my name to secure loans I didn't know about. They put me in debt, destroyed my credit, and ruined my future. All without my consent. The reporters leaned forward, eager to capture every word. Lena knew this was the moment to make her case, to put everything out in the open. Today, I'm here to show the evidence, she continued, holding up the stack of documents. This is proof that my family, the bank, and the lenders conspired to manipulate me and trap me in a financial nightmare. The recordings, the emails, the contracts, all of it proves that this was not a mistake. It was deliberate. And now, I want justice. The room erupted into a flurry of questions. Cameras flashed, and voices clamored for attention. Carla held up her hand to silence the crowd, allowing Lena to continue. The truth is, I was betrayed by the people I loved most. My parents lied to me. They made decisions that have cost me everything. But I'm not going to let them, or anyone else, get away with it, Lena said, her voice unwavering. This is bigger than just me. This is about the corruption within the banking system, the greed that puts profits above people's lives. It's about exposing a broken system that destroys families and ruins futures. Carla nodded, clearly moved by Lena's words. And what do you want the authorities to do? Lena paused, feeling the weight of the question. I want them to investigate. I want criminal charges. I want the banks to be held accountable for their actions. And I want my name cleared. But most of all, I want justice for everyone who's ever been caught in this system. The fallout from the press conference was immediate and intense. The evidence Lena had presented was undeniable, and soon, news outlets were running stories about the corrupt practices within the bank and the fraudulent loans that had been issued in her name. Investigations were launched, and the pressure on the financial institutions began to mount. But as much as Lena had hoped for an immediate victory, she knew this battle wasn't over. The banks would fight back. Her parents would fight back. The lenders would fight back. And as the media coverage escalated, so did the threats. Lena's phone rang off the hook with calls from her family, most of them angry, pleading for her to stop. Her father's voice crackled through the line, full of venom. You have no idea what you've done, Lena. You've ruined everything. We trusted you to keep this quiet. Now you've turned the world against us, he hissed. I didn't ruin anything. You did, Lena shot back, her voice steady. You're the ones who put me in this situation. You're the ones who lied to me, who used me. And now, you'll have to face the consequences. Her father's voice dropped to a low growl. You don't know what you're dealing with. You think the media will save you? They'll turn on you just like they did to us. You'll be the one left with nothing. The call ended with a click, and Lena stared at her phone, her heart pounding in her chest. Her father's words stung, but they only fueled her resolve. She had already lost everything. Her financial future was in ruins. But she would not let them destroy her. She would not let them win. As the days wore on, the legal battle intensified. The banks hired a team of top lawyers to fight Lena's case, and her family began to distance themselves from her, no longer offering support, but instead trying to protect themselves. Jason was by her side, helping her navigate the legal complexities, offering support in the form of information and connections. But it was clear that Lena was in for the fight of her life. The legal system was slow, and the financial industry was powerful. It would take everything Lena had, her courage, her resolve, and her willingness to fight for the truth. In the end, Lena knew that this wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about something much bigger. The right to control her own life. The right to take ownership of her story and her future, regardless of the obstacles in her path. As the battle raged on, Lena made a vow to herself. She would never back down. No matter what it took, she would keep fighting for the justice she deserved. And in the end, no matter how long it took, she would win. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?